Story 6, the coming of the alkali industry to Halton, the local industrial entrepreneurs. John Johnson was a Runcorn man who married into inherited wealth and had enough cash to build a big soap factory in Runcorn in 1803 on the banks of the Bridgewater Canal. In 1816, Thomas Hazelhurst built another soap factory opposite Johnson's, and both of them were described as soap boilers. They'll have been using glasswort, kelp, or some other plant source for their alkali at the start of the industry. There's some of the elements in this story. Runcorn was to become Britain's top soap manufacturing town, despite being still quite a small riverside resort. But elsewhere in Britain, the Leblanc process was taken up for making alkali because people had brought the ideas from Paris with them. For instance, on Tyneside, they were using the Leblanc process. Well, what the Northeast can do, the Northwest can do. And by 1830, the soap works in Runcorn were making their own alkali from the Leblanc process. And the raw materials for making alkali were largely to hand. They needed salt, which is sodium chloride, which came from the Cheshire salt mines and salt fields and came down the Weaver navigation. They needed coal, which came from the coal fields, and limestone, which from Derbyshire or Wales, and sulfuric acid. And the whole of those were carried on the flat boats that sailed along the canals and on the river. Alkali works using the Leblanc process were established during the 1830s in Runcorn, and this became a centre of industry. The sons of John Johnson became business people with a wide business base, making other materials and also owning coal mines in St Helens, limestone quarries in North Wales, ships and shipbuilding works and pyrites mines, so that they could get sulfur from that material. They didn't have to rely on Italy. They had everything to make more and more soap. But sometimes they were so greedy for money, they did bad business deals, and those got the better of them, and they ended up having to sell their smart home to the Hazelhurst family. This is one of their smart homes that you might recognise in in Runcorn. There's another one that eventually became Runcorn Town Hall. They no longer lived the life of the wealthy, the sons, by the end of their lives. Mr. Hazelhurst, also in Runcorn, built his alkali factory. He made soap, he supplied the tanners, the glassmakers, the bleach works. He employed loads of people. He burnt lots of coal and released lots of gas, like all the industrial entrepreneurs. He too built a big house, and his sons actually, one of them was more keen in building chapels and churches than making soap. And he also funded 3 of the local schools as well and had those built. That's one of his chapels. But in Widnes, it was still rural tranquility until 1847, when a young man called John Hutchinson, who was only 22, arrived and visited the area known as Wood End, which we'd now think of as West Bank. John was a young man. He'd studied chemistry in Paris and come back with a head full of the Leblanc process. He'd made friends with a young man called Andrew Kurtz, whose father Andreas had a factory using the Leblanc process in St Helens. And that's where John Hutchinson was working. But there was a bit of bother in St Helens at the Leblanc factory because of the Sankey Canal. Now, this photograph is just very recently from Catalyst. And there is the River Mersey. And just here, you can't see it, but beyond that fence is the Sankey Canal. Well, the Sankey Canal connects St Helens and Widnes, and its exits to the river just there at Wood End, West Bank. It was all green pasture and cows. There was a problem up in St Helens because the company that owned the Sankey Canal had put the tolls up. So all the salt, the limestone and the vitriol making their way up to Mr. Kurtz's factory had to pay more. They had to pay more to get it there. And the alkali coming down to the river, well, they had to pay more on that. And that made it really not greatly profitable. So young John Hutchinson thought, oh, this land looks interesting. I could build my own factory here. You know what? That's what he did. He bought land here in what's now West Bank, and he went ahead and built his factory. That was 1847. By 1851, he'd got 100 men working there making alkali. His number one factory was on Spike Island, right by Widnes Dock. He then built his number two factory and his business grew. He was a chemist. He employed chemists. He employed clever people like John Brunner and Ludwig Mond of German and Swiss background themselves, who went on to found the company that became the UK's biggest chemical industry. They met at Hutchinson's factory, right there in Widnes. And although Hutchinson died when he was 40, he became known as the father of Widnes. He's got 600 people working for him by the time he died. He was full of ambitions for his companies and for Widnes. And this was the Sankey Canal near Widnes Dock, after the factories had been there for some time. The Sankey Canal, the world's oldest industrial canal. On Spike Island, you can still see it now. There's Widnes Dock, and that's the first railway to ship dock in the world. And it looks so, oh, we just take it for granted. But Widnes was world beating. William Gossage was trained in chemistry and worked in several places in Britain, inventing new ways of making things. For instance, he knew one of the problems with the Leblanc process was the dreadful pollution from the chimneys, the hydrochloric acid fumes. There was legislation against those with the Alkali Acts of 1863, and he devised a way of turning this very corrosive vapour to liquid with a condensing tower so it wasn't released to the air. William Gossage came to Widnes in 1850 and built his factory on the site of Catalyst, where Catalyst is now, opposite Hutchinson's number one factory on Spike Island. And here he made alkali and devised more inventions, one of which was his new way of making soap. He could make really high quality mottled soap at low cost and export it the world over. And he was very important in local affairs. This is one of his sons. He was the first chairman of the Widnes Board of Health. He cared for the people around him. This group commented on how the town had grown haphazardly from about 20 houses to hundreds, and how sewage, water supply and sanitation had been neglected. So the people weren't in great shape, and Gossage wanted them to be better taken care of. So did Thomas Sutton Timmis, who was one of his business managers, and he became an important member of the Widnes local board, ensuring there were schools for local children. Gossage's family played important roles in the town, with one of his sons becoming the mayor. And there's Gossage's soap works later with some of the produce and the trains moving stuff around and taking things away. So, ideas for the future. Local companies are in the chemical industry still. They're doing things to make their industry clean and for the future. Maybe the class could have a look at some of the steps that the chemical industry is taking to become zero carbon.